Hi, I'm Mara Webster with In Creative Company, and thank you so much for tuning into one of our talks today. We are a year-round talk series bringing you the best creative voices across film, television, and theater. And today we're joined by the fantastic Augenblick, who is an animator on the current series Headspace Guide to Meditation, but also the head of Augenblick Studios, which he's currently in and moving into a new space right now, surrounded by boxes.
I am. My studio is a big empty room with piles of boxes and equipment because we just moved. We're building a brand new studio this year, which is very, very exciting because we're honestly so busy. So yeah, it's an exciting year, but I am sitting in a fairly empty room.
Right. And because you were just mentioning how busy everything has been, I actually wanted to ask you a little bit about that because it sounds like animation, instead of when the industry shut down, kind
Yeah.
of pausing too, the animation was actually one of the spaces that people were really looking to keep moving forward and to keep making content. And it was one of the parts of the industry that was still hiring throughout this entire pandemic as well, because
Yeah.
there's ways in which you can tell stories with animation that don't require people needing to be in the room the same way, even though that then creates a lot of obstacles. So did you see kind of more of a wave of work that was happening and stories coming together because of that? But also how did that really impact the way that you and your team had to think about everything completely differently and how you were working on these projects that were coming in all of a sudden?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, like everybody, it's like it's been a roller coaster. 2020 was a roller coaster year. Um, the silver lining of all the madness was that animation has never been busier because, like you said, animation just so happens to be a medium that can be made remotely. We don't need to have to be on set or have people in a big room together or be on locations or any of the things that are tricky for a lot of productions right now. So for us, the biggest challenge, I mean, so basically what happened was, around, I guess it was March when everything got shut down. So around March, if you remember, there was that one week when everything escalated by 10, like every day. You remember that? It was like the beginning of the week was
It
like,
was like Tom Hanks, the NBA, five other things.
it's true. Tom Hanks was the canary in the coal mine, right? When something's wrong with Tom Hanks, you know something's up, right? So yeah, so like there was like the beginning of the week, I remember being like talking to my business manager, and we were saying like, oh, there might be an issue. We might have to like look at this. And then it was like the next day, it was like, there's definitely an issue. We should definitely do something. And then, and we were all waiting for like the CDC to give guidelines. And then I think, by that Friday, like Monday, it was like, oh, this could be a concern. And then by that Friday, it was like, okay, we're shutting down. So, by the end of the week, I pulled my team together pretty quickly and, made a plan to convert to remote production fairly fast. And we basically had to create a fairly uh, quickly put together pipeline. I hesitate to say hack together, but we sort of hacked together a quick pipeline for ourselves so that my core team had equipment, had access to our files, could be communicating, right? So we put together a process pretty quickly because typically we're an animation studio here in Brooklyn. We're in a room together. We all work together. It's very symbiotic. So really quickly we had to become a remote studio. So on Friday we made a plan. Anyone that didn't have equipment, we literally drove it to their houses, gave them the equipment they needed, which is a lot of different things. We have editors working, we need, edit suites. We have animators working that need like Cintiq tablets. So we got everyone the equipment they needed, put together, a way for everyone to communicate. And by Monday, we were up and running. So Friday, we closed down. Monday, we were up and running because we just so happened to be in the middle of a project that couldn't stop, right? So, I think that worked out great for us because, that was the point when we made the decision, because who knew what was happening? Oh, should we, put the studio on break? Should we, put things on hold? Should we go dark? We had all these questions of what to do. We just powered through. We never stopped. We never had a break. We just kept working, kept working. We had enough projects to last for a few months, and then what ended up being a year. And that's where we've been ever since. And then, over the course of the year, we've obviously polished our remote system. We've taken it to a whole nother level where we have, now we have like 50 to 75 people all working together. And it's working out really well. I like, to be honest, like I was nervous. My biggest fear or concern was, can we continue to create high quality animation? Can it be a pleasant work environment, right? where people enjoy doing work, even though they're just essentially texting each other all day, right? Or DMing each other. And can people, have fun, and we make funny, entertaining animation, right? In this new world. And the answer is yes. I still prefer to have, people in a room together if we can, but given that this is the situation, that's not worth worrying about. So then, that's what we're doing now. So essentially, animation never stopped. Animation got much busier, and we quickly adapted. And like I said, we now have a remote pipeline that's working really well.
Yeah. And diving into Headspace Guide to Meditation, I was really fascinated in the ways that that caused you as an animator, for you and your team to think really differently about how you're structuring and telling a story. Because, unlike having characters who are interacting with each other and telling kind of like a specific flow of a story, it's very much kind of an individual voiceover where, he sometimes gives some personal details, or sometimes he tells a story about someone that he met and then kind of like leads you into a guided meditation. And each episode kind of has its own very specific and unique theme and approach. So how did that cause you to think really differently about how you wanted to approach it in terms of the medium of animation, given that it's not a traditional narrative structured piece?
Yeah, that's another. These are good questions. So if I ramble on too far, just stop me. But yeah, no, this was a fantastic project to do, especially in quarantine, because the majority of what we do is obviously, animated comedy, usually in the adult space, usually like late night comedy in the Adult Swim world. And here was a situation where some people we knew were doing this animation for Headspace, completely experimental. Like you said, there has never been a show like this. And it presented it it presented itself, about maybe like maybe as soon as like March or April, like we started hearing about this and started talking to them about it and getting some different ideas. And, first off, they did a really experimental thing with the show, which is that, and, Vox was the production company. So it was Vox and Headspace were the main people that we were dealing with. And, they tried a really experimental approach to this, which was they knew they had X amount of episodes they wanted to do, X amount of half-hour episodes. So, and they knew they wanted to do it very fast because they wanted it out soon for a few reasons. One, because it's a really great product, they were excited about it, and also people needed it, right? It was like Netflix knew, like, there's never been a better time for people to, try meditating, and having a tool on their platform where they could calm down, they could take a breath, they they could sleep better, right? So these were all things that were obviously really necessary to all of us. So they wanted to get it done really fast. So what they did was they took all the episodes and they split them up to 4 different studios. And the approach was find studios that they really, really liked a lot, that have a signature style, and let them have creative freedom with their episodes. So there was no overarching branding concerns as far as everyone has to fit this exact look. We need to do exactly this with this, and here's the exact model sheet. There was none of that. It was basically like, we're going to pick 4 people and trust them to do something really interesting visually with, like you said, what is a non-traditional narrative, which is essentially Andy Puddicombe, the founder of Headspace, talking to you directly about meditation, about consciousness, about sleep, and all these like heady concepts that don't typically present themselves to animation, especially the animation that we've been doing. So it was so exciting. It was a great subject matter to be working on. And in addition, it presented a type of animation that was really different from what we've been doing, right? Like, there's no characters, there's no comedy, there's no locations. I mean, it's like, make me a cartoon where there's no characters and there's no places, right? It was essentially what we had to do. So our solution to that, I'm also, I'm an art school kid. I went to school at SBA in New York City. So I'm, in addition to all the cartoons that we all love, Warner Brothers, Tex Avery, and Betty Boop. Like, I love all that stuff. It's all my favorites. I also am a big lover of fine art, abstract art, impressionist art. So, me and, largely my animation director, Devin Clark, we dipped really heavily into, people like Miro, Magritte, Matisse, Dali, like these types of people. We were looking at those types of people for references because what we were trying to do was visualize abstract concepts so that what you'd be doing is listening to Andy, hopefully internalizing what he's teaching, and visually, almost creating like a animation lava lamp, right? Like it's like something that's going to be illustrating his ideas in a non-realistic way, in more of a conceptual way that doesn't step on what he's saying, that doesn't contradict what he's saying, but just sort of, gives you something to look at that furthers your understanding of his ideas. So that was what our approach was. And like I said, it's different than any way we've ever done it. We just totally turned our whole process inside out and really leaned on like the artists and let them get a lot of freedom to do things the way that they wanted to do it as best to illustrate the concepts. And luckily, Headspace and Vox were so supportive of this approach, and it was what they were looking for. So I think it worked out great. It was a lot of fun.
Yeah. And the tone and the feel that you evoke with the images that you've kind of selected is so important in a completely different way as well for a project like this. No pun intended, but you're literally using this animation to try and get the audience into a specific headspace so that when he starts the guided meditation, they're already feeling very kind of relaxed. And it feels like that comes across in a myriad of ways, even just the fact that the animation's always flowing. It never kind of like starts and stops and jumps to another scene. If you're moving to a new space, then something from that first scene carries over, and there's always kind of just like a fluidity and movement. And even just the colors that you use, there's a lot of oranges and yellows and blues and greens, and just like very calming colors. There's nothing very abrasive with it. So when you were thinking about a lot of these kind of like abstract art looks and how you wanted to flow it and create that pacing, kind of how did that feed into just thinking about the physical and like mental space that you wanted the audience to feel in and to kind of like physically respond to as they're watching it and engaging with it?
Yeah, I mean, it was hugely important, So there's a couple of things. One is that you're right that like as we're illustrating these things, it was really important that we had very harmonious colors, that the visuals are meant to like wash over you, right? Which is the opposite of what we typically try to do. It's like we do cartoon comedy, so we're trying to shock you generally, trying to wake you up. Like the last thing you want to do with a comedy is have people fall asleep or not be awake or laughing or freaked out or anything like that. That's typically what we're doing. So in this case, it was the opposite. It was like, no, we want everything we do to really feel, very calming and harmonious. So it was a lot of, you're right, a lot of very calming colors, a lot of calming color combinations. And you caught the fact that, early on narratively, we chose to have little to no cuts. So there's almost no cuts in every episode. Every scene, even though there are scenes, usually it's split up into, Andy will tell like a personal story, or he'll talk about the science of meditation, or his own advice about the physicality of meditation, or the science of meditation. So all of these, there's a lot of different segments, but everyone flows into the next. We almost don't even notice you've gone from one segment to the next. So that a lot of that came from having no cuts, which was so much fun to do. You know what I mean? And look, that's something we started doing like in Super Jail. Like when we did the show Super Jail for Adult Swim, we tried to connect all the shots, but that was like a lot more of like an ADD, like rapid fire comedy thing. Whereas this, it was just kind of trying to get everything to feel really calm. So visually, you're right. Like that was very, very purposeful. And then also, as far as meditation goes, it was so interesting because, I'm a meditator myself. I'm a user of Headspace. So these are not alien concepts to me. In fact, I think they're really important concepts. So a lot of the visual storytelling we were doing, I feel like we were trying to be in line with the concepts of meditation, right? Like, for example, the concept of, a stream of consciousness, right? That ideas and thoughts are just a stream that go by, right? There's not really a start and stop to when you're thinking about things. You're thinking about, you're thinking about lunch, and then suddenly you're thinking about, your childhood home, and then you're thinking about what's on TV tonight. There's no start and stop to it. So we tried to do the same thing visually, that like, that watching the show should feel like just watching a stream go by, right? And you see things that go, oh, there's a leaf, there's this, maybe there's a fish, but it's just going. It just goes and goes and doesn't stop. And then also another really interesting challenge we had with this was they didn't want a main character, right? Like maybe one of the most obvious things to do with the show is, okay, everything is going to be Andy's monologues, right? So let's make an Andy character, right? That's going to be taking us through this world. It was the first thing they said they don't want to do. Headspace didn't want to do it. Vox didn't want to do it. They were like, we don't want to visualize Andy in any way. In fact, the opposite. You should never show any main character. So when you do an animation where you remove the lead character, like, so now what are we looking at, right? So what we're looking at is ideas. And I think that goes in line with meditation and the idea of there, like, being no self, like no sense of self, right? So when you remove the self, then what do you have? Well, then you just have existence and consciousness, So I think it was really interesting. And just like, it's so rare we get to play with these kinds of ideas, you know what I mean? So just, I think for myself and, Devin and Keith, our animation director, and everybody that worked on it, it was really exciting experiment.
Yeah. And with the meditations themselves, it's also objectively a little bit comedic to
Right.
give an animator who works in visual mediums the task
Yeah.
of creating something that's going to be on screen when people are closing their eyes and being told to kind of like shut everything around them off. But at the same time, there is that kind of encouragement of like, if you want to keep your eyes open, if you want to keep watching, and within those moments, you've kind of selected almost like a singular image with just a light flow and like a very slow pacing to it. So how did you make the choices of what felt like the right thing to put on screen for a moment where the majority of audiences are not going to be watching at all, but if they do kind of crack their eyes open, that you don't want it to take them out of the space that they're in?
Yeah, that was another challenge they gave us. So every episode is in two main parts. The beginning is like I said, like lessons about meditation, and the second part is an actual meditation. So that was another one where, when, when we were having our kickoff, they were like, okay, so the beginning, the meditations, we want you to talk about it, we will show these things. And the second part, we want people to meditate. So in a best case scenario, the audience will close their eyes and not watch your animation. That's best case scenario, right? It's obviously the opposite of any other cartoon I've ever made. The last thing you want when someone's watching your cartoon is for them to close their eyes or walk away, right? So that was really interesting. But here's the thing, like you said, we could just put a blank screen. You know what I mean? Like, it's like, okay, close your eyes now, the screen goes blank. This is still Headspace, it's Netflix, it's premium entertainment, right? So even if it's something you're not meant to watch, it still has to look really good, So it has to look, worthy of your subscription price, right? So, so, we hit on this idea of kind of like I was saying earlier, creating like an animated lava lamp, right? Something that sits in the room. It has a pleasing presence. If you want to look at it, it's nice to look at. If you don't want to look at it, you don't have to look at it, right? So it's kind of like trying to create a lava lamp. So it really just boiled down to creating a simple image, which we change up in the episodes. In some, it's like a circle that just pulsates, that replicates the breathing. You'll see in other ones, we do things that are a little bit more oceanic. So we try to create different things, but we really hit on the fact that it has to be a simple image, it has to be repetitive, but not overly, there really there can't be much of a build or an arc to it. Because if there's because we were at first, we're like, oh, what if we start a thing and then it's drawing and then it eventually becomes a thing, You don't want anything that's going to make people want to open their eyes. You know what I mean? It's like, I really want to see where that was going. You know what I mean? Like, it's like that circle that started drawing something. What's going to draw? Like, you want to like people to be like, oh, this isn't really necessarily something that needs my attention. I think I'm okay to close my eyes. So that was the idea. So we tried to make something repetitive with a slight build, but nothing that like felt in any way like engaging in that way. You know what I mean? So that was where we landed. And I think it turned out pretty nice. And again, like you said earlier, colors were really helpful too. Really important to have the right colors that don't it's like, even when you close your eyes, you still can see bright colors. You know what I mean? So we didn't want to wake anyone up.
Yeah. And one of the episodes that you animated was very much talking about the relationship of meditation and the spaces that you can go to, and the impact that that can have on creativity, and even just kind of the neurological experience that your brain goes through, and spaces that it can open up, and how it can really help ideas to flow. You were mentioning before that, you've used Headspace before and that you meditate a lot yourself, but in working on that specific episode and the conversation that it's having about creativity and the connectivity with that and meditation, did it kind of cause you to pause and have any sort of conversations with yourself because of that?
Yeah, I mean, definitely. Like, I mean, it was, it was really interesting to like start, because, once I started the project, I was like, I should really like, dive into Headspace. And so I tried to use Headspace every single day of the project, just so it just sort of became my world. And it was really interesting to like start the day meditating and, you know, attempting to achieve the absence of thought, right? With the voice being your literal boss. You know what I mean? And at first I thought that was going to be difficult. And also, look, the Headspace animations that they do on the app are gorgeous as well. And honestly, intimidatingly beautiful, right? Like I was like, oh, I hope we can be that good. So it was an interesting experiment or a challenge to start the day meditating, hearing your boss talking in your head, and also looking at really, impressive animation. So that was kind of funny, you know what I mean? But like honestly, like the Headspace app is really good, and it was really effective, and I had a really nice time meditating, and honestly it was really effective during the project. You know what I mean? Just the sheer act of sitting down, being quiet every morning, calming down before you start your day. Like it does help the creative process. It helps, keep your emotions in check. It helps the creative process. It helps you be a little more measured with the way that you deal with both clients and your staff. You know what I mean? So I felt all of that was really, really fruitful. And as far as like the specificity of creativity, yeah, I mean, like honestly, all of the lessons that they gave that we got to work on, I found it really inspiring to be hearing these things as we were working on it, because they were all so relatable. Like you said, with creativity, with being open-minded, later on some things about sleep and consciousness. So, all of it were things that related directly to the type of work we do. So yeah, I felt like all of us had a connection to the material that, you don't always have. Hopefully you do when you work on projects like this. On any projects, you want to be connected with the work that you're doing. But in this case, like you're right. It's like, when you're being creative all day and working on a project about creativity, you know what I mean? There's a really interesting sort of loop there with the way that it operates.
And then kind of stepping back and looking at your career as a whole, one of the things I find so fascinating is that you've had a career filled with choices that you've made that have been, very distinctive, and having people around you be like, actually, don't do that. You were working at MTV Animation when you started your studio at 22, and everybody was like, what are you doing? Why would you leave a full-time job with benefits and go and try and start this? Like, don't do this. And or that you
Right.
had an intervention from your bosses at the time trying to stop you,
Yeah.
and even working in adult animation, which you've been talking extensively about, was a thing that wasn't the medium that it is now. Now you can turn on TV and see it, in the middle of having dinner any day of the week, but it wasn't the case when you started working in that realm and really specifically saying, this is the medium I want to work in. And even just to the fact that you've always stayed very true to 2D animation, which again, the animation industry has kind of pushed into a lot of other spaces, and you've really kind of like kept that as the core of the artistry that you create.
Yeah.
And so it's just really fascinated about the way in which you've always just kind of had this gut instinct, which has kind of told you what to do and made you feel that whatever you're doing is in the right place. And also just following the things that are going to fulfill you creatively, first and foremost.
That's extremely nice of you to say. I mean, everything's an adventure. Owning your own company, especially artistic company, it's an adventure, and it's an adventure every single day. And honestly, I'm an animator. I've always been an artist my whole life, ever since I was a little kid. I went to art school. So, I do think that it's rare that a creative company, the founder, the owner is an artist themselves. And so for me, I've always led with the creative goals that I have more so than business goals, sometimes to the detriment of profit, but it's managed to work out. You know what I mean? It's like, all I can do, I don't like to be bored. I like to be creatively excited. So, I do sort of tend to jump into a lot of new things when I find them exciting, and not prolong things once I get bored by them. So, I would just say over the years, it has been 21 years that we've been doing this. And, the connecting thread is, I go by my instincts. I go by what I enjoy, whether it's styles of animation, types of entertainment, types of narratives, people that I enjoy being around, right? Artists that I enjoy. So, I like to, have a good time when I'm working. I don't like being surrounded by people I don't get along with. You know what I mean? So, I tend to surround myself with, other people that are like-minded about, art and comedy, and cartoons, and also that push push me into territories that maybe, I'm not aware of, or that I'm, that like, maybe I'm not comfortable with yet, So I think that just the instinct of trying to, being attracted to going with my instincts of what I enjoy and what I like has really been the only connecting thread for 21 years. There's never been a point when I said, well, I really like this. I really like 2D, but it would make much more financial sense for us to become a CGI studio, which a lot of studios did. You know what I mean? Because it does make a lot of financial sense, right? If you're looking at things purely financially, if your goal is to make a lot of money, you're going to make different decisions than if your goal is to enjoy your work creatively. That just is true, right? So it depends on where you want to be. And honestly, both are arguable. Like, you know what I mean? Being a very successful financially hugely successful, global company, that's pretty impressive too. It's extremely impressive. It's just not my goals in life, right? So, that's really been the leading charge all the way. And, and then just to talk specifically about 2D animation, it's just my favorite thing. I've always drawn. I don't remember a time when because people say, oh, when did you start drawing? I literally can't remember a time when I didn't draw, right? I've always been drawing. And honestly, it's the first thing most kids do. You know what I mean? So as many times, there's been so many times in my career that people say, well, there's no more 2D animation. Like, see what's happening? Like, look at Pixar, look at these things. Like, what are you going to do? Or like adult animation, that stuff, no one likes that. No one's watching that stuff. It's good for festivals, not good for TV. Kids stuff, you should be doing only kids stuff. Like, people are constantly giving me advice like that. And I'm always like, well, it's just, this is what I like. This is what I like to do. And I feel like with 2D animation specifically, people draw from the beginning of their lives. Drawing has existed from the beginning of humanity as far as we know it. The very first thing that people were doing was cave paintings, right? They were drawing the world around them. And to this day, when a little child, the first thing they do is they start drawing, right? So I just feel like drawing is in some ways, an eternal concept. People will always draw, and they will like to draw and like to look at drawings. So I just, now that I've seen 20 years of running my studio, I've seen lots of styles go in and out of favor, and I've seen a lot of, different levels of polish versus crude versus trends versus color schemes. I've seen every different trend come and go. But the one thing that always stays the same is drawings. People like drawings, you know what I mean? And that's what I enjoy the most, and that's what we've sort of stuck with. And I'm proud of that. So I appreciate you pointing that out. I'm proud that we have sort of always led by things that I enjoy the most.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like a wonderfully creatively fulfilling way to work, and congratulations on everything with Headspace. And thank you so much.
Thank you. I think this was a really great. You asked so many deep questions. I hopefully I didn't ramble too much, but I really appreciate that conversation. It was really, really, really fun.